Hey team, Yasin here, and in this training we are going to be talking about the coaching skill of transformational question sequences. So let's go ahead and hop right in. As you already know, we are continuing our theme of the art of transformation inside of this module, and we are learning how to be able to influence others through coaching and coaching skills. And so like I said, we are going to be talking about the coaching skill of transformational question sequences inside of this training. So let's go ahead and hop right in. As always, we have the training outline there for you. So that way, if you ever do need to reference this guide, you can do so pretty quickly. And so let's go ahead and answer the $1 million question here, which is, what are transformational question sequences? And so in module 5, you will be receiving scripts and templates to guide you through your coaching sessions with your students. But the question is this, what do you do when you are in a situation where you don't have a script, you don't have a template? How do you actually proceed with the coaching session, right? How do you still make sure that you can guide the student through a process to help them still have the transformation in their lives? And so the answer to that question is transformational question sequences, because transformational question sequences provide that structure that you can follow, right? And so TQ sequences, so transformational question sequences for short, TQ sequences are a series of questions that we ask in a certain order to facilitate the transformation process. And so the goal of TQ sequences is to frame and sequence questions in a way that is effective in interrupting and rewiring old patterns. And so let's go ahead and go over an example of a transformational question sequence so you can get an idea of exactly what that looks like. And so a transformational question sequence would look something like this. So the coach would say, hey, what are the tools, or which of the tools from the Nutrition What to Eat training seems most exciting for you to try this week? And then the student would respond. And then obviously the coach would verbal mirror, conscious listening, all that kind of stuff. And then the coach would continue and say, hey, in order to whatever the student wants to try this week, what might you need to let go of? Student responds, verbal mirroring, conscious listening. What else might benefit you? What else might benefit in your life when you make this change? Same thing. Coach then goes on to the next question. What would be the best part of that? Same thing. Coach then goes ahead and does a visualization exercise and then asks, hey, does this accomplishment feel like it's in line with the person that you want to become? From there, again, student would go ahead and respond. The coach would then move on to the next question and say, wonderful. Given that, what is one action that you can take in the next 24 hours that will move you measurably closer to where you want to go? Student responds, conscious listening. Finally, coach says, hey, what needs to happen in order for you to be able to make this action inevitable? And then finally, the coach says, hey, who or what in your life can hold you accountable to this action? Now, as we go through that entire question sequence, right now you might be saying, wait a second, Coach Yasin, what is going on? Coach Yasin, I know this. This is from the skill session. Yup. And the cool part about this skill specifically, the one that we're going over inside of this training, is that you have already been asking questions in this structure. You just didn't know that it was the transformational question sequence structure yet. Pretty cool, huh? And so inadvertently, you've actually already been practicing this skill because you've already been going through the scripts that are provided for the transformation sequences. Yup. Now, what we're going to go ahead and do though is inside of this training is that you have been doing this unconsciously. You didn't know that this was happening. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and talk about an under the hood look of what is behind these questions and why they actually work. And so let's go ahead and do that together right now. So we're going to go ahead and talk about the 5 steps of a TQ sequence, okay? And so the TQ sequence is made up of a skeleton that is made up of 5 parts. And so step number 1 is stepping back. Step number 2 is letting go. Step number 3 is saying yes to becoming. Step number 4 is taking empowered action. And then step number 5 is setting up accountability, okay? So those are the 5 steps of a TQ sequence, of a transformational question sequence. And so what we're going to go ahead and do right now is let's take those 5 steps, the skeleton, and let's overlay them on top of the example that we just went ahead and talked about. So that way you can get an idea of what it is that we are looking at. Is that, okay, step number 1 was the first question. Hey, which of these tools seems most exciting for you to be able to try this week. So you step back, right? You say, okay, hey, let's look at what we have learned and let's step back and really look at, okay, what do we want to do from this and how can we go ahead and maybe reframe this or have a different perspective? From there, step number 2, letting go. In order to be able to be successful with this, what might you need to let go of? And then in this case, we have another let go question. Is that, okay, what else might benefit when we make this change? Again, letting go. What would be the best part of that, aka say yes to becoming? I'm going to explain more of this here in a second so that we just follow along with me. And then over here, hey, does this accomplishment feel like it's in line with who I wish to become? Again, step 3, say yes to becoming. And then finally over here, step number 4, take empowered action, which is, what do you got to do in the next 24 hours? Obviously not in that way when you're talking to the student, but what do you got to do in the next 24 hours that's going to move you closer to being able to be successful with this? What needs to happen in order for this to make this action inevitable? And then finally, step number 5, who or what in your life can hold you accountable for this action? So that is step number 5, which is setting up accountability. Okay, so that's kind of like the overlay of it, but you might be like, okay, cool, we talked about the 5 steps, but what do they actually mean? Let's go ahead and get into the details of it so that way you can understand a little bit more. Okay, so here are the 5 steps and here are the explanations of the 5 steps. Remember, these are the skeleton, the sequence by which we are asking questions, especially at the end of a coaching session. Okay, so step number 1, stepping back. Stepping back is all about getting distance from the current situation or emotional state. This is helping the student step back so that way they can have a new perspective or a reframe. Why? Because if they can't see their current situation in a new way, they are going to continue to stay stuck. And so if the student is stuck in their current emotions or perspectives, they'll never actually be able to open up and see their situation in a different way. Okay. Step number 2, letting go. Once the student has stepped back, it's time now to be able to help them let go of anything that might be holding them back when they think about taking action towards what it is that they want. Okay. And so this step is all about letting go of what's holding you back. That's step number 2. Step number 3 is saying yes to becoming. Once you've actually gone ahead and stepped back, you've let go, it's now time to be able to check, hey, is this action step aligned and oriented with the North Star and the person that I am becoming? Okay, that's step number 3. Step number 4, taking empowered action. This is all about making sure that the action step that we are assigning or that we are going to be doing is coming from a place of certainty and clarity and not fear and should do's, okay? And so the action step has to be coming from an internal referencing standpoint. And then finally, step number 5, set up accountability. This is where we want to make sure that it is inevitable that your student is going to follow through on the action that they've decided to take. Okay, so make it inevitable that the action steps will be taken. And so that is what the breakdown of what each of the 5 steps actually looks like. Okay, now what I want to go ahead and talk to you about really briefly is, now that we know what transformational question sequences are, it's basically a structure, a skeleton of types of questions that we follow in order to make sure that the student is able to be successful, right? But why are they important? And that's what I want to go ahead and talk to you about now. Why are TQ sequences important? Well, there are 2 major reasons why transformational question sequences are important. Number 1 is buy-in, and reason number 2 is forward moving. Let me go ahead and briefly talk to you about both of those reasons right now. So reason number 1, buy-in. The TQ sequences are the foundation of how you get buy-in from a student in a coaching conversation. Why? Because if you just assign a student homework, the chances of them feeling encouraged, supported, and motivated to get that done are practically 0%. But when you walk the student through a question sequence, especially at the end of a coaching conversation, then you're able to go ahead and get them involved in the action process. And so the transformational question sequence is what allows the student to accept the action steps as their own and remove some potential obstacles that might be preventing them from being successful with the action steps sometime in the week or sometime in the time that you have gone ahead and assigned them the action steps. And so just imagine, right? If you went ahead and said to the student, you said, hey, you got to do fill in the blank this week, versus if you walk the student through the entire example from earlier that we went ahead and walked through, which one is going to get them more buy-in? There's a big difference, right? And so without transformational question sequences, you will not be able to get the full buy-in of actually helping the student go through their transformation, okay? That's reason number 1. Reason number 2 is forward moving. And so transformational question sequences are not just generic vanilla questions that we're just asking for the sake of asking. TQ sequences really have a direction behind them in that they are helping progress forward and helping the student look towards the future, help them progress in a way that's actually going going to be productive. And so we're using these questions as a way to allow the student to challenge themselves and mentally walk themselves through the process of any potential obstacles that might come up for them to be successful. Okay, so those are the two major reasons why TQ sequences are important. Number one is buy-in, and reason number two is forward moving. Beautiful. So we are chugging along inside of this training. Let's go ahead and now talk about the how of TQ sequences. And so transformational question sequences are less about the specific wording of the questions and more so about the skeleton behind the questions. Okay, so any question really could work. It doesn't have to be the questions that we are talking about, as long as it fulfills the role of the step inside of the structure. Okay, and so the other thing I want to go ahead and mention is that the templates that we're providing, they really are only templates. And so really you can mix and match and come up with your own questions, and they don't even have to be necessarily in order, as you're going to learn about here in a second. But I do want to go ahead and kind of just expand for you. When we talk about the different skeleton steps, we really are talking about concepts that we already know, things that you are already inside of your tool belt as a coach, things that are already inside of your toolbox. And so when we talk about step number one, which is stepping back, really all stepping back is allowing the student to be able to look back, right? Have a 30,000 foot view, reframe some things, and decide what it is that they want to work on. Step number two, letting go, same thing. It has to deal with things like reframing that we've already talked about. Step number three, saying yes to becoming, has to do with a mini North Stars and becoming your version 2.0 self, right? All of that has to do with that. It's just aligning, hey, is this action step oriented towards where I want to go? And so it's just going ahead and bringing that to the forefront of the mind. Step number four, taking empowered action. Again, we had an entire training on designing action steps, and that's what it's talking about. Same thing, setting up accountability is very similar to gamified accountability with the toolbox of coaching that we already talked about. And so that's why this training is really not necessarily a standalone training, but more of a combination between a lot of the different skills that we already talked about and structuring them in a way that you can see how this actually becomes relevant inside of a coaching conversation. And so the big thing to know about this is that for now, what we are doing is we are feeding you the questions behind the TQ sequences, but later in module 5, we will go over other types of questions that you can ask, and then eventually you'll be able to make up your own questions as well. And so for now, it's just important to get familiar with the steps and the questions so that way you can follow the structure, right? And so sometimes the order of the steps might not be exact. And so in some cases, you are able to even ask the questions out of order and really get the same outcome. And so for now, for the purposes of what we are doing right now, is that these are going to be the templated questions, okay? But like I said, once we get into module 5, we'll talk about more questions that you can ask inside of coaching sessions, as well as you making your own. And so questions that are relevant to, hey, what seems exciting for you to be able to try this week, things that are pulling from the reframe training. So questions around reframing can also be put in here. And so you don't have to stick with like, hey, only one question per step. It's just a matter of saying, okay, you know what is going to allow the student to step back? And that might end up being 2, 3, 4 questions in order for them to be able to step back and reframe what it is that they want to do, right? Same thing here. You can see letting go actually has 2 questions on here. And typically these are going to be the letting go templated questions. But again, remember, you don't necessarily have to stick to them as long as you understand the gist, the structure, the skeleton of what it is that we are talking about, right? And so over here you see, hey, step number 3, also, there is 2 questions for that. Again, there could be 1 question, there could be 2 questions, whatever fulfills the purpose of allowing the student to feel like, okay, yes, I am getting aligned with who I am becoming. I'm not just taking this action step and it lives on an island by itself. This is an action step that is taking me closer to who I am becoming, okay? Step number 4, that is going to be typically the templated question. But again, there's 2 of them that are on there. Step number 5, setting up accountability. And so there's different wordings that we can have, but the purpose of this training is to really open your eyes to the structure of transformational question sequences. Make sense? I hope so. Let us know if you have any questions on that, okay? And so as we start to close out this training here, we are going to go ahead and talk about self-coaching, transformational question sequences. And so in the same way that we've been talking about all of these coaching skills in respect to applying them to your students, they also apply when you are doing self-coaching. And so good self-coaches actually learn to be able to use transformational question sequences on themselves in the same way that they would use it for students. And so in the same way that you would walk a student through the 5-step skeleton or structure, right? Step back, let go, say yes to becoming, take empowered action, setting up accountability. That's how you can actually get buy-in from yourself in order to be successful as well. Rather than telling yourself and demanding yourself to do things, you can go through this thing and say, okay, hey, let me step back. Let me create my reframe. Let me let go of the things that are going to stop me from being able to be successful with this action. Let me make sure that this is in alignment with who I am becoming. I want to say yes to that becoming. Let me make sure that it is in an empowered action step, and let me set up the accountability to make sure that I feel that I have that support to make sure that I can get this done. And so these are just a few examples of how a good self-coach can use TQ sequences when coaching themselves in order to set themselves up for success. And that's how good self-coaches know how to be able to apply these coaching skills to themselves as well. Okay, so with that being said, that is the transformational question sequences training. What is next? Obviously, you get the gist at this point, I'm sure. Skill equals knowledge times reps. This training has given you the knowledge. We're now going to go ahead and put it into practice with the reps inside of skill session number 4, which is all about reframing and question sequences. And we are going to be doing that with the reframing concept as well. Okay, so to go ahead and close out this training here, let's go ahead and talk about your engagement question. Go ahead and let us know, hey, what were your thoughts on this quick training? What did you like and enjoy about this training? What were some of your biggest takeaways or ahas from this training? Remember, this is an action step so that we can get your feedback, as well as you can cement what it is that your biggest takeaways from this training are. It's kind of like mini notes for yourself, right? And then in terms of the action steps, these are going to be quite simple, just like we have for the most of the trainings here in module 4. Number 1, make sure you watch and study this training in full. And then number 2, make sure that you go ahead and complete the engagement question for this training, which is the one that we just went ahead and talked about. And so with that being said, the next training is going to be all about skill session number 4. I'm super pumped and super excited for you to go ahead and start practicing these skills. This is Coach Yassine checking out. I will catch you inside of the next training.